Because, I'd go into some office and here I am, a big shot singer and hot in the country and making a lot of money and everything. But I knew on the other side of that door there was a man who was educated.
Before Waylon Jennings died, he looked back on a life and revealed truths most men take to their graves. Fans thought they knew his story: the cocaine addiction, the amputation caused by diabetes, and the rise to country music legend. But what he shared in his final years was even more shocking than anything the public already knew. So why did he choose to finally speak out? And what were the secrets that left so many stunned? Join us as we uncover what Waylon Jennings revealed and why he waited until the very end to say it. The joke that defined the next 40 years of his life. Every story about Waylon Jennings eventually comes back to one night in February 1959, and to 5 words spoken as a joke that turned into one of the heaviest things a person could carry. The context matters because, without it, the story sounds like a ghost tale instead of the deeply human thing it actually was. By 1958, Waylon was 21 years old, working as a disc jockey at KLLL Radio in Lubbock, Texas, with a voice made for radio and almost nothing else to show for himself. Buddy Holly walked into that radio station one day, shoved an electric bass guitar into his hands, and told him he had 2 weeks to learn to play it. Holly had already appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, had co-written songs that were selling 1 million copies, and was one of the most recognized names in American music at the time. Taking Waylon Jennings under his wing was not a strategic move. It was the instinct of someone who genuinely heard something worth developing. Holly produced some of Waylon's earliest recordings and hired him to play bass in his new backing band for the Winter Dance Party tour across the American Midwest in early 1959. The tour was miserable from the start. The bus had no functioning heat. Drummer Carl Bunch ended up hospitalized with frostbite on both feet. Performers were doing hundreds of miles overnight in sub-zero temperatures, sleeping in their clothes, and playing shows exhausted and sick. Holly eventually decided to charter a small plane just to get ahead of the physical misery for one leg of the trip. The original plan put Waylon Jennings on that plane. He gave his seat to J.P. Richardson, known as the Big Bopper, who had come down with the flu and wanted to see a doctor before their next show. Richie Valens won his spot from guitarist Tommy Allsup in a coin toss backstage. When Holly found out Jennings was staying on the bus, he joked about hoping the bus would freeze up again, and Waylon, thinking absolutely nothing of it, shot back 5 words that followed him for the rest of his life. He told Holly jokingly that he hoped his plane crashed. The plane went down less than 5 miles from the Mason City Airport just after 1 in the morning on February 3rd, killing Holly, Richardson, Valens, and the pilot on impact. In a 1999 VH1 Behind the Music interview, Waylon said that for years he thought he had caused it himself. He said he was a completely changed person after the crash, that he quit for a while and would not pick up a guitar. He described being terrified for years that someone would find out what his last words to Holly had been. The guilt was not just about the joke. It was about being 21 years old and alive when someone who had already contributed more to the world than he had was dead. He could not reconcile that equation for a very long time. His son Shooter later described how his father talked about Buddy Holly almost every single day of his life. Waylon never voluntarily went back to the surf ball room in Clear Lake, Iowa, where it all happened, until he was accidentally booked there in 1999 without realizing where he was going until he arrived. The crash also cost him financially in ways that have been mostly forgotten. After the tour continued for 2 more months without its headliners, Waylon received only half of what he had been promised because the promoters had shorted the musicians once the stars could no longer perform. He was broke, grief-stricken, and playing shows for reduced pay in the dead of a Midwest winter, and the flight home to Texas for Holly's funeral that someone had promised him never materialized either. So if Waylon Jennings was carrying that much unprocessed guilt from an innocent joke made at 21, what happened to a man carrying all of that when the music industry got hold of him, and Nashville started trying to turn him into something he was not? The drug catastrophe that Nashville helped create. Waylon Jennings did not develop a drug problem. He developed a drug catastrophe that ran for 20 years, consumed more than $2.5 million, brought federal agents to his recording studio door, nearly cost him his marriage 3 separate times, and contributed directly to the physical collapse that killed him at 64. When he wrote his autobiography in 1996, he went on the record about all of it, because he said from the beginning that he wanted nothing to do with the sugar-coated version that made addiction look survivable without scars. It started with amphetamines while he was sharing an apartment in Nashville with Johnny Cash during the mid-1960s. Nashville ran on pills. That is not a figure of speech. The touring circuit that artists like Jennings and Cash were trapped on during that era required them to play as many as 300 dates a year, often traveling hundreds of miles overnight between venues that were booked with no consideration for human logistics. Waylon was constantly forced to request advances from RCA Victor just to cover travel and accommodation between shows, while the booking agency absorbed most of what he earned. The debt accumulated alongside the amphetamine habit because one was a direct response to the other. He ate dozens of amphetamine pills a day for 15 years. Loretta Lynn used to walk him around backstage before shows when he got too high to perform safely. That is the unglamorous reality beneath the leather and the black hat. Not a cool rebel in control of his image. A man physically dependent on stimulants just to survive a schedule that the industry had designed entirely for its own benefit, rather than his. Then Elvis Presley died in 1977 at 42, and Waylon looked at what pills had done to the most famous body in the world and switched to cocaine. He ignored a White House meeting with President Jimmy Carter to get high with a Washington Redskins player. He shared cocaine with members of the Oakland Raiders at halftime during a game the Raiders were losing badly, and they came back to win by an extraordinary margin. He spent $1,500 a day at the peak of his habit and accumulated over $2.5 million in personal debt before filing for bankruptcy in 1981. The DEA got involved on August 23, 1977. Federal agents raided his Nashville recording studio after discovering that a package containing 27 grams of cocaine had been mailed to him from a New York contact. While the DEA waited outside for a proper search warrant because the original one had an error in it, Waylon and his drummer worked to eliminate all the drugs on the premises. He was arrested anyway and charged with conspiracy and possession with intent to distribute, a charge that cost him around $100,000 in legal fees before it was eventually dropped. Waylon turned the whole incident into a number 5 country single called "Don't You Think This Outlaw Bits Done Got Out of Hand?" Getting arrested by the DEA and then making chart-topping music about it is either the most outlaw thing anyone has ever done or a sign that the line between authentic rebellion and entertainment product has completely dissolved. Probably both. The moment that finally reached him came when he walked into a room and found his 3-year-old son, Shooter, holding a cut-off straw to his nostril, pretending to be like Daddy. Even after that, it took 2 more years before he could summon the actual will to stop. In April 1984, with Jesse Coulter beside him on a small ranch outside Phoenix, he went cold turkey after 8 years on pills and 12 with cocaine on top. He stashed $20,000 worth of cocaine on his tour bus, parked in the driveway, as a security blanket, in case the urge became unbearable. He never touched it. He later said it took 8 more years before he stopped waking up at 3 in the morning, still wanting it. If the drugs were partly a symptom of what the music industry did to him, then what was really going on in Nashville that pushed one of the most talented country artists alive to this level of self-destruction in the first place? The war with Nashville and the lie hidden inside the victory. The outlaw country movement is one of the most romanticized stories in American music. Waylon and Willie in leather and denim fighting the corporate machine, winning creative freedom for every country artist who came after them. All of that is real. What Waylon admitted before he died is that the branding around it was a manufactured product, that the record label he had spent years fighting used his rebellion as a commercial vehicle, and that the victory came wrapped in a lie that he had been helping to sell without fully realizing it. When Waylon arrived in Nashville in 1965, the system was a form of total creative control. Producers at RCA would not let him use his own band in the studio, would not let him select the material he recorded, and would not let him play his own guitar on his own tracks. The Nashville sound of that era, the polished countrypolitan style championed by Chet Atkins and others, was built on session musicians and orchestral arrangements designed to sell country music to a pop audience. It was not designed around what any individual artist actually sounded like. He fought the system for years and got nowhere until 1972, when a bout of hepatitis nearly killed him, left him bedridden and considering retirement, and brought a New York business manager named Neil Rishin into his orbit. Rishin negotiated a contract with RCA that included a $75,000 advance and full artistic control over his recordings, something no country artist had ever secured from a major label before. When Rishin sat down with Jerry Bradley and Chet Atkins at RCA to close the deal, the negotiations reportedly got extremely tense. At some point during his dealings with a Nashville producer who had been frustrating him, Waylon pointed a loaded pistol at the man in the recording studio. That story circulated for years, and Waylon never denied it. The albums that followed under that creative freedom were the best work of his career. Lonesome, Ornery, and Mean, and Honky Tonk Heroes in 1973 established what outlaw country actually sounded like when it was allowed to exist without interference. Are You Sure Hank Done It? This Way became his 6th #1 single and was a direct attack on the rhinestone culture of Nashville, the guitar-shaped swimming pools and sequined suits that Waylon genuinely despised. Then, RCA's producer, Jerry Bradley, had an idea. He compiled existing recordings from Waylon, Willie Nelson, Jesse Coulter, and Tom Paul Glazer, slapped them together with a weathered Wanted poster design on the cover, and called it Wanted, the Outlaws. The same institution that had spent a decade refusing to let Waylon use his own band turned his rebellion against that institution into a commercially packaged product. It became the first country album ever to be certified platinum, selling over 1 million copies in 1976. Waylon admitted in a 1988 interview that the Outlaw label was primarily a tool to merchandise and sell records. He said he remembered when they were deciding to call it Wanted, the Outlaws, and that the name had come from an earlier album title of his, not from any coordinated movement. The rebellion was authentic. The music was authentic. But the commercial apparatus built around it was exactly the same kind of Nashville machine he had been fighting, now using his image as the product. He was so genuinely contemptuous of what Nashville represented that he boycotted the Grand Ole Opry for 10 years because they would not allow performers to use a full drum kit on stage. He skipped his own induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2001, too ill to travel, and sent his son Shooter to accept the honor in his place. When he was buried, his headstone in a mesa, Arizona cemetery sat flush with the ground. No monument, no fanfare, nothing rhinestone about any of it. So if Waylon spent decades fighting an industry that kept turning his fight into a product, what did all of that actually do to his body and his finances when the record sales stopped and the bills finally came due? The physical collapse. Nobody wanted to acknowledge. 3 times in his life, Waylon Jennings went completely, catastrophically broke. Not struggling to cover expenses broke. Accountants moving into your office. Building, IRS threatening to lock you out. Broke. The first time came early in his career when his booking agency was absorbing the majority of his road earnings. The second and third came directly from cocaine, the $1,500 a day habit that added up to over $2.5 million in personal debt by the time he filed for bankruptcy in 1981. After getting clean in 1984, the body started collecting on everything the drugs had deferred for 2 decades. Cocaine suppresses appetite, and Jesse Coulter had been force-feeding him milkshakes through the worst years of the addiction just to get calories into him. Once he stopped, the appetite came back completely, and the weight followed, which contributed directly to a type 2 diabetes diagnosis that would eventually kill him. In October 1988, 4 years clean and relatively healthy looking, he started having chest pains and denied them for 2 years before doctors finally examined him. He needed a quadruple bypass. A few months after that surgery, his tour bus was headed toward a show in Tennessee when the chest pains returned with enough force that his driver immediately rerouted to Baptist Hospital in Nashville. Tests showed partial blockage in 3 arteries. He went straight into triple bypass surgery. 2 major heart surgeries on a 51-year-old man in the same calendar year on a cardiovascular system that had spent 20 years running on stimulants. He kept working through all of it, and in one of the more quietly remarkable details of his later life, Waylon Jennings earned his GED at age 52 so that his children would see him setting an example about education. A country music outlaw icon who had never finished high school, sitting in a testing room alongside people 30 years younger, because he wanted his kids to understand that it was never too late to go back. That is not the image the legend projects, but it is the reality the man lived. By 2000, the diabetes had progressed beyond what traveling could accommodate. The pain from complications had reduced his mobility to the point where performing regularly was no longer physically possible. He underwent surgery that year to try to improve blood circulation in his left leg. It was not enough. In December 2001, his left foot was amputated at a hospital in Phoenix. 6 weeks after the amputation, on February 13, 2002, Waylon Jennings died in his sleep at his home in Chandler, Arizona, aged 64. His closest friend, Johnny Cash, died less than 2 years later from diabetes complications as well. The 2 men who had shared a Nashville apartment in the 1960s ate pills together to survive the touring circuit and built the most important friendship in outlaw country history, left the world within 22 months of each other from the same disease. The night before he died, he asked Jesse Coulter to sit at the piano and play for him. No audience, no recording, just music in its simplest form in a quiet house in Arizona, between 2 people who had somehow survived everything that 40 years of that life had thrown at them. He held her hand and told her to keep singing and not let the music die with him. Now, to the most important question: what made him decide to go completely honest about all of it before the end? Why he told the truth and what it changed. Waylon Jennings did not have to write an honest autobiography. He was already in the Country Music Hall of Fame. He had changed what artists could legally demand from their record labels. He could have written a legacy-protecting version that glossed over the DEA raid, softened the bankruptcy details, left the gun-pointing incident vague, and kept the full scale of the addiction private. He chose to do the opposite, and the reason he gave was simple. He wanted to tell the truth. He did not want to write the sugar-coated version. His 1996 autobiography, written with journalist Lenny Kaye, went into all of it without the kind of careful omissions that most celebrity memoirs rely on. The drug addiction was documented in specific, uncomfortable financial detail. The survivor's guilt about Buddy Holly was described with a rawness that made readers understand it was not a settled thing even 40 years later. What Waylon Jennings was doing before he died was refusing to let the mythology replace the man. He had watched the industry do that to Hank Williams. He had watched it happen to Buddy Holly. He was not going to let it happen to him if he could help it. The real story was messier and more human and more worth knowing than the wanted poster version. He made sure it survived him. And because he told it honestly, it did. And does knowing the full story make the music hit differently? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.